Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy, and welcome to One to One. As lawmakers, workers' advocates, and journalists focus increasingly on the status of immigrants and low-income citizens, we are learning about the racial and economic injustices that they suffer every day. The Workers' Justice Project is a Brooklyn-based center that addresses the inequities faced by day laborers and domestic workers. It provides them with a safe space where they can defend their rights and voice their concerns over such issues as safe work environments, fair wages, and workplace discrimination. Ligia Guallpa, the executive director of the project, is herself the daughter of a former day laborer and garment worker. We'll talk to her about the center's work and about the stories of the thousands of people who make up this often invisible workforce, especially at a time when anti-immigrant sentiments and policies are on the rise. Welcome.
Thank you.
A recent New York Times article revealed that in 1980, Donald Trump employed a group of 200 undocumented Polish workers to demolish the Bonwit Teller department store building to make way for what became Trump Tower. That they worked 12-hour shifts without gloves, hard hats, or masks, and were paid as little as $4 an hour, less than half the union wage if they got paid at all. Trump later paid $1 million to settle a lawsuit over the unlawful treatment of those workers. How pervasive is wage theft in New York City?
It is very common. It's the daily experience of low wage and specifically immigrant workers who work in unregulated industries, informal industries, to actually not be paid at the end of the day. And in this time, and I think it's more common to see actually employers and companies being entitled actually to just abuse and exploit workers' rights.
You think it's happening more and more?
It's happening more and more these days, and especially because a lot of companies feel entitled to threaten. They feel like under this current immigration climate, there is actual power that they have to actually abuse and even threaten workers with.
So who are the primary victims of wage theft? Is it primarily undocumented immigrants? I suspect it's a lot more people.
It's not only undocumented. It's an issue that affects every person or every working person that works in low wage industries. And we're talking about people that work in construction, fast food restaurants. We're talking a broad economy that
nail parlors,
yes,
hair parlors, yeah.
You know, it affects every single industry that for generations have not been organized. And in an economy where, you know, workers' rights protections are actually weak and are not being enforced because of the lack of resources, because actually a lot of the laws that we have in place are a lot of times are not enforceable. And in the current economy, we see more and more workers facing exploitation, not being paid, actually their lives being at risk because they are not provided the right proper training to actually do the work safely. A lot of times not even having time to have, you know, a dignified lunch time.
Right, and all of that is against the, the labor laws. The Workers' Justice Project do you primarily serve day laborers and domestic workers? Is that your primary clientele?
We started and we were founded by mostly day laborers and domestic workers. That's how we started back in 2010. The membership has expanded. We right now recently opened a new center that it's based in Williamsburg. That the idea is to serve, obviously continue to serve day laborers and domestic workers, but also be a hub and a space where it brings workers from across industries. And we're talking about, we welcome workers, and we have a membership that is growing from workers that work in restaurants, street vendors. We have members that are actually working even in warehouses and food processing industries, because there is a broad economy where, you know, exploitation is happening across the city and across different sectors.
Right. Do day laborers play a significant role in the construction projects you see going around the city?
They do. And it's been seen. I think there is a history of day laborers, right? Back in the days, right now the face of day laborers is it's the immigrant face, right? We always have seen, and every time we talked about day laborers, we think it's mostly immigrant Latino workers.
Is that not true?
Is it not true? There is a broad day labor workforce. First of all, I think we need to remind history. The first day laborers in this country used to be, also immigrants. Back in the days, used to be the Polish, Italian, who used to also stand in corners, and even black workers used to be in the South Bronx. There is a history that it showed that a lot of Black women used to stand in corners as well, looking for
domestic work.
So there is a history that it's not a new phenomenon.
Now the undocumented, well, the day workers in general, are they working on the big projects, the huge construction projects, or on smaller projects, or both?
They're all over New York City. They're working across the sector. There are a lot of day laborers. Day labor workforce is a way how immigrant or whoever wants to start in construction, they start as a day laborer, right? And a lot of that work a lot of them start working in small projects, which can be small improvement projects. But in recent days, there is a construction boom in New York City, and there is a high demand for a workforce. And now these days, especially with the construction boom, we see more workers, day laborers being hired to build homes, build actually hotels, schools, hospitals.
And there's no requirement that the developers hire union workers for those jobs. There is something on the books that says that specifically if projects are being built with tax dollars, there must be prevailing wages, and a lot of these prevailing wage jobs actually mandates to be higher unionized. But there is a big issue, right? Like in terms of who enforces. We have members that actually have experienced wage theft in prevailing wage buildings, where a lot of those buildings actually are being built by tax dollars, and a lot of them they're not paying the prevailing wage.
They're not prevailing the prevailing wage.
Which in New York is what? New York City again, is it $11.50?
The 1150, yes.
Okay.
So they're not paying prevailing wage. Aside, they're not informing not even workers that actually that job is prevailing wage. And a lot happens because there is a whole industry, a chain industry, where a lot of times the workers do not even know that who is their right employer.
Because they're working for subcontractors.
They're working for subcontractors where abuse is more extreme.
Right.
And exploitation, it's more severe.
About 10 years ago, I remember that residents of Jackson Heights, Queens, were complaining about day workers standing on a corner, every day hoping to be picked for work. And there was at least one incident where the police actually arrested some of these workers in response to community complaints. Are day workers still standing at pickup spots around the city, and are residents still complaining about them?
There's due. I mean, day laborers, it's a growing workforce throughout New York City. There's more day labor corners now than before. And a lot has to happen because there is a construction boom. There is a need for workers, and workers will be there whenever there is a need where the industry will need them, right? So there is a growing boom. There is a lot of misconceptions, I think, as who day laborers are. A lot of people ignore that, these are people actually that live in a neighborhood. They are family members who actually, their kids go to the same schools, probably as any other person who lives in that same neighborhood. And a lot of workers, what they're doing is just, trying to make a living in New York City, and the only way to do it's for them to look for work in the street corners.
With the Trump administration crackdown on undocumented immigrants, have day laborers who are standing at these pickup spots, have they been targeted by immigration officials? Is that something that you have heard is going on?
What we have seen is threats in the communities. When Trump was elected in the first few months, there was this sentiment of hate that it became visible, that existed, and it became more visible in the community.
Community people became more hostile towards
immigrants.
Yes.
One of the things we heard in neighborhoods in the first few months was that For instance, a lot of members were saying, you know, like I've been threatened that there is immigration ICE. And even in Staten Island, from another worker center that we partner very close, El Centro, we hear stories from them as saying that actually there were people that were dressing up as I agent and threatening community members.
Really weren't.
Who weren't, right? And this sentiment of hate, we actually faced also in Bensonhurst, where people felt entitled, saying, you know, we voted for Trump, you shouldn't be here.
Right.
So this sentiment of hate has been fueled and it continues to exist. And this is also the daily experience of day laborers who actually are told by their employers at the end of the day, you know what, I shouldn't pay you. If you say something, I'm going to report you to ICE. Because there is this, under this current immigration climate, the sentiment of hate has been fueled, but at the same time, there is this entitlement that now I'm entitled to exploit.
It has
and
been
abuse.
legitimized.
Yes.
Right. There's been agitation on behalf of domestic workers for a number of years. In 2010, New York State passed a bill creating a domestic workers' Bill of Rights. Has that had any kind of impact on the working conditions or pay of domestic workers? Have you seen that?
So that's the first historic law that New York City passed in recognizing the rights of domestic workers. And one of the biggest challenges I think we faced in New York City in this current, and for generations and years as well, is the enforcement crisis that New York City faces. New York City and many other cities across the city have actually passed a strong legislation that protects workers. But at the end of the day, it's not just passing a law. It also becomes how we enforce it and who are the people on the table sitting down of how we're going to enforce and make sure that those laws that are written in the books are actually protecting workers. And we have seen that same issue with the Domestic Bill of Rights, with many other laws that are actually in place that attempt to protect workers. So one of the things that we as an organization are building is actually how we build the enforcement mechanism, right?
Who can the domestic workers complain to about if they're being for wage theft or having to work overtime without pay or whatever? Who can they complain to?
So they can go to the Department of Labor,
right,
to submit a claim.
Division of Labor Standards.
Yes, yeah, the Division of Labor Standards. There is worker centers across New York City that a lot of our worker centers are actually team up with lawyers that can also provide that legal support to make sure that workers actually can complain and submit a wage theft complaint and can process a case. But a lot of times also we build power, because a lot of times workers ignore that there is this collective power that they have in their own communities, right? A lot of times what we have done historically, it's actually we have been more effective than city agencies in when it comes
to nonprofits.
And then recovering wages, right? Confronting employers, shaming employers in their neighborhoods.
And you actually do confront people from your organization, actually confront employers?
Okay. A recent case that we won was with Samuel Just, a employer who lived in Williamsburg, who actually created a company, a cleaning company that ironically was called Just Clean. And he hired a dozen of workers to clean homes throughout Brooklyn. He hired them for the first week with the promise of being paid, and he denied payment at the end of the day. He disappeared on them. And what we decided is we started confronting. We did a mega march of 200 people that went in front of the house to actually confront them and say, you know, first of all, this is somebody that isn't in our neighborhood that is stealing people from our community, right? And that create visibility about a real problem that the community has.
So did he clean up his act, or did the district attorney go after him, or what happened?
The district attorney went after him because it became a community issue, a workers' rights issue. The community actually started persecuting him, and for the first time in history, actually, the district attorney actually started a criminal put criminal charges on this guy.
Was he convicted, or what happened?
So there was a negotiation that happened. He negotiated to pay. He ended up paying. He had to do 200 hours of community service, doing actually cleaning work in the Bronx. And he also had to admit that he committed wage theft.
Okay.
And that was a huge victory.
Yeah.
For the first time, actually having an employer admitting that he committed wage
And
theft.
did the workers get money?
Yes,
out
they
of it?
did.
Okay.
They were fully paid. And it was the first time we partnered with the district attorney and to actually make sure that we
action.
enforce it,
Right.
Enforce the laws.
Okay.
And I think that's something that we want to see more in our city, like more enforcement mechanisms and what role community organizations play
Right.
in enforcement and what agencies. A lot of times we think DOL, which is the Department of Labor, it's the only agency, but it's no. There is a lot of entities that I think play an important role when it
Okay.
comes to enforcing basic laws.
We're going to take a short break, then we'll be back with Ligia Guallpa after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Cheryl McCarthy, and I'm talking with Ligia Guallpa, Executive Director of the Workers' Justice Project. So we talked about wage theft. Another area that you're involved with, that we touched on, is working conditions. And I read about something involving the domestic workers cleaning on your knees.
Yes.
What is that?
It's a common practice that for domestic workers who work in Brooklyn, specifically with the Jewish community, where especially during the cleaning, during the holidays,
right.
a lot of these homes have to be cleaned very deeply. So a lot of the women are asked to scrub the floors on their knees to make sure it's deeply, carefully cleaned. And it's a practice that it's a lot of
legal?
It doesn't really has a law that says how you should clean, but it's a very inhumane practice, right? Because it's really unsafe, and that's where we actually talked a lot about that. This practice, it's inhumane, is not a dignified practice for somebody to.
So what can you do about the practice?
So one of the things we have started doing initiative is to start organizing a lot of the workers, to start educating the employers, right, about that there is other methods to do cleaning, deep cleaning without exposing your health. And we have had conversations about what those practices are. We have done health and safety trainings as well to educate and create consciousness among even women to recognize, like, this is a deep issue. It's not only inhumane, but it's also unsafe.
But also, so you're empowering the workers to say, no, I'm not going to do that on my knees, but I can do it this way.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's powerful because it changes also the dynamic of power, recognizing for workers themselves that they have the power to negotiate those conditions.
Another area is racial discrimination. The New York City Commission on Human Rights has reported a 60% increase in discrimination complaints in the last few years. Why do you think that's the case? Is it the immigrant thing again, or what's going on? It's
been in existence for generations. I mean, it's a real thing where it's clear that a lot of times workers of color actually are the ones who are asked to do the dirtiest and dangerous job, while a person that it's not of color or might speak a better English is asked to do the safer and less risky job.
Right.
And that's very common. And not only discrimination of the racial discrimination, but the age discrimination. We see it among workers as well, where, a lot of times even in the street corners where workers of age are not hired. And that's another issue. Now in construction, we see a lot of more women in that industry.
That was interesting that your organization has actually encouraged women to pursue construction work.
Yes. We have encouraged, but at the same time, we have started organizing women that are already working in construction. So we started reaching out women that are in construction to come to our trainings, and we have a couple of women that were trained, and they become leaders in the organization who are doing outreach to more leaders, and also being role models to other women that are saying, we can do this work.
So what can a day laborer or who is being underpaid or not paid or working without safety precautions, or a domestic worker who's been asked to clean on her knees, what can they do about it?
So I think it's important, the first step for any type of worker, to know what their rights they have in the workplace. A lot of times they ignore that they have rights. And so we encourage them to come to our Know Your Rights trainings or get informed or get information even online. There is the New York State DOL has a lot of information about the rights that workers have, or come or join a workers' rights organization, get informed, also learn what to do. And one of the things we do at the organization is we have committees that we actually teach workers about how you can organize in your own workplace, what actions you can take, and how those actions can actually protect you from being fired, and actually effectively negotiate better working conditions. So we strongly encourage workers to not only know their rights but also take action, and get to know that we are one of the worker centers across New York City, but there is many others in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Manhattan, and Staten Island.
That they can protest to their employers about things they're being asked to do.
Yeah, all workers have rights, and they're entitled to ask to have the right to be paid at least their minimum wage. Overtime after 40 hours of work, workers are entitled to pay their overtime, which is time and a half. They're entitled to have lunchtime, which is something that is denied as well at the end of the day. And we have a saying in Spanish that says hora trabajada, hora pagada, which is our work and day that must be paid.
You talked about how you went after the owner of Just Cleaning for not paying his workers or underpaying them. Tell me about some of the other situations where you have stepped in, specific situations to intervene on behalf of workers.
So Just Clean is one. Others have been related to health and safety. It's another issue that construction workers face. And one of the things we recently did was we actually passed the legislation. We didn't pass, but we actually were advocating for a more inclusive legislation to be passed, which is 1447C, which actually mandates workers to have access to health and safety trainings before they work in construction sites.
That was a law that the city council passed since de Blasio came in.
Yes, that's a law. The initial law said that workers will have to go through apprenticeship programs, which we will completely oppose because of many other issues. The core issue was about health and safety and how we can protect workers. And we play a role in modifying and making sure that, the 1447 doesn't make reference to apprenticeship programs, but actually makes reference to health and safety training, and making sure, actually pushing for the city also to make sure that there will be funds available to provide health and safety training programs, and that all workers will have to have access, despite
And the city is going to pay for it?
The part of the campaign and the commitment that we have been pushing is that the city has to pay for these health and safety trainings, and make sure that these trainings are open and available throughout New York City, and not only at our center, but many other community centers can be able to provide to the community, despite their immigration status, where they come from or where they live.
Have any of your workers been affected by the scheduled elimination of the DACA program, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals? Is that something?
We have seen a lot of the kids of our members who have been affected, because a lot of the day labor community or the immigrant workforce have kids that they brought here when they were really young. And what we have seen is a lot of their kids actually lose DACA. Or are actually, because they couldn't renew it.
Okay.
Some of them couldn't renew it. Some of them actually.
Why would they not be able to renew it?
There was because there was a time limit. You could only renew it if your DACA, I think, expired in October.
Okay.
But others didn't expire until then, so they couldn't renew it. So a lot of them actually will be without a DACA until hopefully we have a new Clean Act, Dream Act.
So not only their parents, but they are possibly in peril.
Yes, they're kids, and that creates a lot of emotional distress among families, because a lot of the parents worry also about the future of their kids.
We've got 1 minute left, so tell me about some of the priorities of the Workers' Justice Project going forward.
So one of our priorities is making sure that all workers in New York City have access to health and safety. So one of the things that we'll be launching is actually a safety program to make sure we create safety zones in New York City. That's one of the priorities, making sure all workers have access to training, but also make sure that they also have a safe workplace. That's one of the key priorities. We also have an enforcement committee that it's aiming to actually target wage theft. Not only making sure that workers are able to complain, but how we make sure other city agencies also play a role in the enforcement of wage theft.
How big a staff do you have?
We're a staff of 7 right now. And we have 2 worker centers, one in Williamsburg and one in Bensonhurst.
Okay, and you're funded. You get a lot of money from the city and also from private funds as well.
We get most of our funding comes from city funding, foundations, and individual donors.
Okay,
and membership dues.
Right, a very important issue, a very serious issue that we've been hearing about more certainly in the last 5 to 10 years. I'm afraid we're out of time. I want to thank Ligia Guallpa for joining me today. For more information on the Workers' Justice Project, you can visit their website, workersjustice.org. For One to One, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.